Welcome to the program. Hello, I'm your host, Ron Whitlock. This program is about the third costliest storm to ever strike the mainland of the United States of America, costing $27 billion in damage throughout the United States. It struck the Texas coast, Galveston in particular, and Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Orange, the Golden Triangle, on September the 12th. That's when it made landfall. Now, yours truly arrived on Galveston Island the morning of the 12th of September and awaited the arrival of Hurricane Ike. When we arrived, shortly after we arrived, we did a stand-up on the seawall of Galveston. With the roadway on top of the seawall, you'll see all of the debris coming on to the seawall boulevard, coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, even before Hurricane Ike arrived. Also on the program today, we want to bring in at this point Robert Hart, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. Robert, thank you for joining us. And Gerald Estepanian, who is a Service and Operations Officer, also with the National Weather Service. Thank you both for coming. They're going to share with you and I exactly what was happening with Hurricane Ike coming into the Texas coast before it went all the way up to Canada and ultimately to Iceland at last report. Now, fellas, all the reports indicated that Hurricane Ike was going to probably become a major hurricane, Category 3, possibly even Category 4, to intensify right at landfall. What happened to the storm causing this not to occur?
The storm intensification with hurricanes is very difficult to predict. We can very effectively nowadays predict the path of the storms, the trajectories, but the intensification is difficult. What happened with Hurricane Ike is that it had already intensified so much before striking Cuba that it was just going through a cycle that after it went over Cuba, it lost a lot of its intensity and it had to gain it back again over the Gulf. And the Caribbean Ocean, the northwestern Caribbean Ocean, where it really intensified before it struck Cuba, it had very favorable conditions, much more favorable than the conditions that were over the Gulf of Mexico. So all the experts were in all the conditions, and the experts were suggesting that a Category 3, possibly Category 4 hurricane could be possible before landfall. It went over cooler waters, just near the Gulf, near the continental shelf, the platform, before making landfall. And the trajectory was not the same trajectory. It changed a little bit, and that made it to stay below the Category 3, 4 predictions.
Well, with that said, it came very close to being a strong hurricane as far as the Saffir-Simpson scale goes. It was a very high-end Category 2 hurricane at landfall, with the official advisory latest bulletin from the National Hurricane Center right before landfall being at 110 miles per hour, with 111 miles per hour being the threshold for Category 3. So yes, it was a strong Category 2 and almost a major hurricane, Category 3.
It's usually best sometimes not to focus exactly on the categories so much, because every storm has its own personality. There are different sizes of storm, and the winds, usually the surge associated with the storm is not so much directly related with the actual category, but with the size of the storm and the area of hurricane force winds that are affecting the Gulf of Mexico.
The eye wall was expected to be driving in front of it a surge which would have topped the Galveston seawall by 5 to 6 feet. Apparently this did not occur, predominantly because it did not do the strengthening that you're indicating was anticipated at one point.
Well, that's part of it, but with the eye wall itself, it was so large, it pushed the strongest storm surge just a few miles to the north-northeast of Galveston.
More toward the Golden Triangle, Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Orange.
Yeah, now if the eye would have came in a little farther to the south and west, maybe even by 5 miles, then yes, Galveston could have had a lot more in the way of that significant damaging storm surge.
Now, the actual eye wall struck Galveston Island the evening of Friday, the 12th. We seemed to feel it there in the hotel right around the midnight hour. Then about 2 o'clock, we saw the actual interior part of the eye, or felt it. We didn't see it because it was dark, obviously. The morning we wake up and we see that there has been damage to the Holiday Inn. There has been damage done to the San Luis Hotel, Resort, and Conference Center, which was the emergency management location, headquarters for all of that you're seeing now, to all of the people, mainly city, some county, some state, and here are the hotel that we're talking about, the San Luis Resort and Conference Center. This is the back entrance facing west. Some of the debris actually fell on police units there in the parking lot. All of the police department had been brought into the hotel along with other first responders such as the fire department, city manager, the superintendent of schools, the police and fire chief, obviously. The first floor parking garage area, we're seeing some flooding in about 1 foot to 2 foot area. And this is in the morning right after the storm has moved away. The eye had moved away, but the continuing winds coming off the Gulf of Mexico out of the southeast and continuing to affect the overall Galveston Island proper itself. And then, fellas, as you can see, Saturday morning at dawn, looking out into the Gulf of Mexico, still rather turbulent, still rather ominous. And obviously, the major damage has already been done as the surge moved up on top of the eye wall, bringing a lot of debris, as you're able to see, seaweed, benches of various kinds, and actual big giant rocks were brought up from the seawall proper and deposited on top of the seawall boulevard. That's the name of it. Here you see the rocks, of course, have been brought up, showing the power of a surge. Very powerful element, is it not?
Water is very powerful.
So here we are. We have survived. We do not know at that point whether or not any lives had been taken. The police and fire department are going out in the community. They're already beginning to do cleanup, not only on Seawall Boulevard, right at the entrance to the city off of the Gulf of Mexico. Storm surge causing most of the damage along the immediate Texas coast. Fellas, that seemingly is where we saw in Texas most of the actual devastation as it relates to this storm, and that was the actual storm surge. Is that what your agency also is reporting and documenting at this point?
Some of the preliminary information shows that, yes, there was some wind damage, but the storm surge damage was even more damaging than the winds. It was just such a large storm. So much of the Gulf of Mexico, the winds were pushing so much water forward. This is what really caused much of the damage across the upper Texas coast and even into southwestern Louisiana. Tell
us what the expected wind velocity and gusts were supposed to be and what they ended up actually being.
For a strong Category 2 hurricane, we are talking about, at the time of landfall, sustained winds of around just over 100 miles per hour, maybe 105 to 110 miles per hour.
And it was a Category 2 within 1 mile of being a Category 3 storm.
Yes.
But you really don't want to look at just 1 mile per hour. That threshold is a man-made threshold. I mean, 110 miles per hour is pretty much going to cause the same amount of damage as 111 miles per hour is. So you don't want to focus on just 1 mile per hour.
Now, this reporter, covering hurricanes my entire professional career, now have been through 2 eyes in 2 hotels within a 6-week period. I've got to tell you, it's quite a unique experience, fellas, to have gone through with Hurricane Dolly at the Bahia Mar Resort and Conference Center with the eye wall coming over that hotel, winds coming out of the northwest, then out of the west, then out of the southwest, and then off the Gulf of Mexico, coming actually from the south, and then 6 weeks later being on Galveston at the San Luis Resort and Conference Center and Spa, and having the same identical thing with winds coming out of the northwest, then out of the west, then out of the southwest, and then coming out of the southeast off of the Gulf of Mexico onto Galveston Island. So it's really unique to see that as a reporter, obviously. Have you ever experienced that before, either one of you?
No, not the exact.
You got to be in the Weather Bureau actually looking at documentation.
I've been through tornadoes and I've been through other hurricanes, but as far as the actual eye itself, where it gets calm in the center, then the winds switch around, no. The closest I came to was Hurricane Katrina, and the center of that storm passed within about 10 miles of my location, but I've never been in the actual eye of a hurricane.
And the closest I have been was Hurricane Hugo in 1989 in Virginia, but I was not in the eye of the storm. These systems are very small. They produce a lot of damage in localized areas, and if you are unfortunate to be in that location, is where you see most of the wind damage.
Most of the devastation that was total and totally profound would have been at Bolivar Peninsula and Crystal Beach in the area of Galveston. Now this is going back to Galveston proper. This is a pier-like flagship hotel out over the Gulf waters just beyond the seawall in Galveston. This is all of the debris that's left of the Murdoch Pier and the Balinese Room, two landmarks in the area of Galveston and the Texas coast. Both of these facilities saw such acts as Bob Hope and others who came through the years, over the last 80 years, when the Balinese Room and the Murdoch Pier were the scene of much entertainment, much frivolity, a lot of entertaining and a lot of fun on the part of Texans and people from the entire world and the United States coming to the Texas coast to enjoy the hospitality of the region. But all of this debris is what was left over from these major piers, that flagship hotel, other things coming off of the perhaps Cuba. There may have been some of the debris that may have even come as far as Cuba. Is that possible? When they have $4 billion in damage in Cuba, the United States having $27 billion in damage, is it possible that some of this debris might have come from Cuba?
It would be very difficult, but not impossible.
With all of the helicopters flying over Galveston, providing security to basically this area which has curfews, all of this is I-45 that you're now seeing, with all of these vessels that have been moved and broken from their moorings in Galveston's yacht basin, just to the south and east from I-45, going between Houston and the Metroplex into Galveston Island. All of these vessels, all of these ships were brought out as if toys and deposited right here on I-45. So the southbound lane moving from Galveston proper into Galveston from the inland areas of Texas were blocked off by all of these ships, and these ships are going to have to be moved off with major cranes. Now, the one lane going into and out of Galveston, only at this point in time when this video was made, were FEMA trucks, Texas National Guard, DPS, first responders from all of the Lone Star State coming in, and this is what welcomed them when they got into Galveston proper. When any other officials had to drive onto the island of Galveston, that's what they saw. The storm strikes. You've seen the damage on Galveston Island. After that particular fact, we did venture into Houston proper to see what had transpired. All of the power had been disrupted to 2.6 million customers. That's over 4 million people without power. This is the day immediately, obviously, after the storm had struck that region. How long the power would remain off? Estimates were some areas would not have power restored for up to 4, even potentially 5 weeks. We did visit the downtown area of Houston, and we did notice that there's tons and tons of this kind of material that have come off the high-rise office buildings in the downtown Houston area. This is all stripping of all those plate glass windows that front on the outsides of all of these major buildings in the Houston area. Tons of this debris being swept up, cleaned up by city crews in the city of Houston. Also, tons and tons of glass that have broken out of these office towers in Houston proper. We understand that downtown Houston did not receive the amount of damage that it did during Rita and other hurricanes that have struck the Texas coast. Looking at the eye of the storm, the eye itself was planned and thought to be coming into Corpus Christi, and then north to Rockport, and then north to Port Lavaca. Then it was anticipated it might be at the Matagorda County line, but then it did strike Galveston Island and, to a degree, Beaumont and Port Arthur Orange. What was causing those steering currents to not affect the coastal bend, but ultimately to go all the way up to southeast Texas?
It was a combination of factors. A high pressure Originally, there was a front that went by when Ike was over the Gulf of Mexico. Then behind that front, an area of high pressure developed. And that area of high pressure, it was responsible for steering Ike a little bit more toward the west, northwest, rather than northwest. So originally, it was thought that that high pressure was going to be strong enough to take Ike into the Corpus Christi area. However, that high pressure did not intensify as much as predicted, and a weakness farther north with an associated trough of low pressure was responsible for moving Ike a little bit more farther north into the upper Texas coast.
Is it possible, fellas, that had it not gone over Cuba and lost some of its strength, lost some of its power, that it could have continued to buffered through and broken through these upper steering currents?
Well, it's possible, but the thing with Ike, or any hurricane, when you have a really strong hurricane, and Ike was a very strong hurricane when it plowed into Cuba, such a strong hurricane running into an air mass, or rather a land mass, the storm weakens, and then when the storm moves back over water, it's just very hard for it to re-strengthen as it was before it hit the landmass.
Because
now,
it's somewhat disorganized.
Yes, but if Ike was a lot weaker when it hit Cuba and then moved back over water, then the chances of the storm strengthening even more would have increased. So a strong storm hitting a landmass, not a great chance, or not as great of a chance to re-strengthen, but a weak storm hitting a landmass, then moving back over water, then a greater chance of it strengthening.
What has been the biggest surprise of the National Weather Service as it relates to Ike, and what you would have anticipated, what you would have thought Ike would have done, and as it relates to damage and effects of people, property, and the nation, as it relates to where you see it now?
It's pretty much what we expected. We were expecting a big damaging hurricane to move into Texas, and you've seen the damage yourself firsthand. After
leaving downtown Houston, we went out to the San Jacinto Monument and the Battleship Texas to see if these two landmarks, so important in Texas history, had been affected in any way. This is what we learned.
Optimistically, we have just several trees damaged or destroyed, and after some cleanup activities, we should, with any luck and the power coming back on, be able to open to the public and give them some place to go and enjoy a little time away from the house. Here, we fared much better. We were initially very concerned that the battleship might come loose from its mooring system, and fortunately, we must not have gotten the surge that was predicted.
Your ship's store seems to have gone through the most damage because it is flooded at this moment about halfway up the wall up to the ceiling. A lot of damage within your store?
Absolutely. It's pretty much a total loss. We were out here on Saturday about 1 o'clock, and the flooding was all the way up to the roof. So we anticipate that the entire contents are a total loss. Luckily, we had moved almost everything out of there already, but we're still probably in the tens of thousands of dollars worth of lost merchandise and equipment.
After ascertaining from those who are in charge of the monument, where Texas won its independence from Mexico at the Battle of San Jacinto and the Battleship Texas, all of the artifacts were under damage. We made contact with the governor's office and others, but ultimately it was Texas Senator Eddie Lucio and his staff that got generators to the site, got them charged back up, got the air conditioners working, and protected the artifacts at the San Jacinto Museum and Monument. Fellas, thank you for joining us on the program and for your evaluation of what transpired.
Glad to be here.
Hope you can come back again under better circumstances. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, adios.